If you eat 2 eggs every morning because you want to keep your muscles strong as you get older, you're doing something useful. Eggs are convenient, they're affordable, and 1 large egg provides about 6 grams of high-quality protein. So 2 eggs give you roughly 12 to 13 grams. That's useful. But here's the mistake. Many people quietly treat those 2 eggs as if they've checked the muscle box for the day. They haven't. And the answer isn't simply to eat more eggs. Because protecting muscle as you get older depends on something much bigger. What happens during the rest of your day, how you're preparing those eggs, and whether your muscles are ever receiving the signal to actually use the protein you're eating. There are 5 mistakes worth fixing. One involves a way of eating eggs that looks healthier than it really is. Another is based on something you've probably heard about breakfast for years. And the biggest mistake has almost nothing to do with eggs themselves. Let's start with mistake number 5. 2 eggs can absolutely be part of a good breakfast. The mistake is confusing a good source of protein with all the protein strategy I need. Here's a useful way to see the difference. An expert group that specifically reviewed protein needs in people over 65 recommended an average daily intake of at least around 1.0 to 1.2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight for many healthy older adults. That doesn't mean everybody watching this video should calculate a number and start forcing themselves to hit it. Needs change with body size, activity, appetite, illness, and medical conditions. But it gives us perspective. For someone who weighs about 154 pounds, or 70 kilograms, that range would work out to roughly 70 to 84 grams across the entire day. 2 eggs? About 12 to 13 grams. So the lesson isn't, 2 eggs are bad, and it definitely isn't, then I need 6 eggs. The lesson is this. Your breakfast is one contribution to a full day's nutrition. If 2 eggs are the only meaningful protein you eat until dinner, your real problem isn't the eggs. It's the empty space around them. Think about your own morning. Maybe it's 2 eggs and coffee. Then lunch becomes crackers, toast, soup, or something very light. Dinner arrives, and that's where almost all the day's protein finally appears. The eggs did their job. You just asked them to carry the entire day. So don't begin with the question, how many eggs should I eat? Begin with, where is the rest of my protein coming from? Because the next mistake shows why the way you eat those eggs can matter too. And one old human experiment found a surprisingly large difference. You may remember the old image. Crack raw eggs into a glass, drink them down. No cooking. No processing. It feels almost aggressively healthy. And it's easy to assume that because the egg is raw, you're somehow preserving more of its protein. But researchers have actually tested this in humans. In a small study, 5 people with ileostomies consumed the same amount of labeled egg protein in 2 different forms, raw and cooked. The measured true ileal digestibility was about 51% for the raw egg protein and about 91% for the cooked protein. That's a dramatic difference, but this is where we need to be careful. It was only 5 people, and they had ileostomies. So you should not turn those numbers into a rule that says everyone absorbs exactly half the protein from raw eggs. And you definitely can't say cooked eggs build almost twice as much muscle. In fact, a much newer experiment adds an interesting twist. Researchers gave 45 healthy young men 5 raw eggs or 5 boiled eggs after resistance exercise. Boiled eggs produced a higher peak of essential amino acids in the blood. But muscle protein synthesis was not significantly different between the raw and boiled egg groups. So the honest conclusion is more useful than the exaggerated one. Cooking clearly changes egg protein digestion and amino acid availability. But we do not have evidence that simply boiling an egg creates some enormous muscle-building advantage. And there's another reason this matters more as you get older. Raw and undercooked eggs can carry salmonella. The FDA lists older adults among the groups more likely to develop severe illness from salmonella infection. So, if someone told you raw eggs are the serious way to get protein, there is no muscle advantage here that makes that risk necessary. Cook your eggs appropriately, and then move on to the things that matter more. Because mistake number 3 is almost the opposite. People obsess over something that current research says may not be nearly as magical as they think. You've probably heard some version of this. You need protein first thing in the morning. Or, if you miss protein at breakfast, you've already lost the battle for muscle. Breakfast can absolutely be a useful opportunity to eat protein, especially if your normal breakfast is almost entirely toast, cereal, juice, or coffee. But that is different from saying there is a magical morning window, and we now have remarkably fresh evidence on this. In July of 2026, researchers published a systematic review and meta-analysis looking specifically at protein or amino acid intake at breakfast in adults aged 60 and older. They included 7 randomized trials with 305 participants. And compared with control conditions, increasing protein in the morning did not show a clear improvement in lean mass, grip strength, lower limb strength, or physical performance. The researchers also stressed something important. The certainty of the evidence was very low. That doesn't prove breakfast protein is useless. It means the claim, "You must eat protein in the morning or your muscles will suffer," is much stronger than the evidence allows. So if you like eggs at breakfast, keep eating them. If breakfast is a convenient place to improve your overall protein intake, that's reasonable too. But don't become so obsessed with whether you ate your eggs at 7:30 or 9:30 that you ignore what happens for the next 12 hours. Because your muscles don't experience breakfast in isolation. They experience the whole day. And that brings us to mistake number 2. Imagine 2 people. Both eat the exact same breakfast tomorrow morning. 2 eggs, same size, same protein, same time. Person number 1 later has another meaningful protein source at lunch and another at dinner. Person number 2 has coffee and toast in the morning, a very light lunch, snacks through the afternoon, and finally gets a substantial amount of protein at dinner. The eggs were identical. The days were not. And that's why counting eggs can be misleading. The expert recommendations I mentioned earlier are expressed as daily protein intake for a reason. Your muscles need a continuing supply of amino acids from the food you eat over time. So one of the simplest self-checks in this entire video is not, "How many eggs did I have?" It's this, "What did I eat at lunch?" And then, "What did I eat at dinner?" If breakfast is the only meal where you can clearly point to a protein source, that's a much more useful thing to notice than arguing over whether 2 eggs should have been 3. And this is also where personalization matters. General protein targets are not personal prescriptions. Older adults with certain kidney conditions, metabolic diseases, poor appetite, unintended weight loss, or other medical issues may need individualized nutrition advice. So the goal isn't to turn breakfast into a math exam. The goal is to stop thinking of one food as a complete strategy. Eggs can contribute protein. Yogurt can contribute protein. Milk, fish, poultry, beans, lentils, soy foods, and other foods can contribute protein. There are many ways to build the day. The important shift is from one healthy food to the whole pattern. But even if you fix that whole pattern, even if your protein intake is completely reasonable, you can still make the single biggest mistake in this video. Because protein is building material, and building material doesn't tell your body what to build. This is the point I want you to remember tomorrow morning. Protein supplies building material. Resistance exercise supplies a signal. Those are not the same job. When you eat protein, your body digests it into amino acids that can be used for many purposes, including maintaining and repairing muscle tissue. But muscle is also remarkably responsive to what you ask it to do. If a muscle repeatedly has to produce force against resistance, the body receives a very different message than it receives when that muscle is rarely challenged. And this is where nutrition advice often becomes too food-focused. We ask, which breakfast, which supplement, which protein, which egg, but the food cannot perform the exercise for you. A meta-analysis of 21 randomized trials involving 1,249 older adults looked at resistance training with and without protein supplementation. Adding protein to resistance training produced modest additional improvements in several measurements of muscle mass and strength. Not every outcome improved, and it did not prove protein plus exercise magically fixes every age-related muscle problem. But it supports a much more sensible way of thinking. Nutrition and resistance training belong in the same conversation. That's also consistent with expert recommendations for older adults, which emphasize both adequate protein intake and physical activity, including resistance-type exercise at an individualized, safe level. Now, resistance training does not mean you suddenly need to become a bodybuilder. The word resistance simply means your muscles have to work against a load. Depending on the person, that might involve machines, it might involve weights, it might involve resistance bands, or appropriately prescribed body weight movements. The right level is different for a healthy 62-year-old who has trained for years and an 82-year-old with balance problems, arthritis, heart disease, or a recent fall. So if exercise isn't currently safe or familiar for you, the answer isn't to copy a difficult routine from the internet. It's to find an appropriate level with help from a qualified professional when necessary. But the principle remains: eating protein and challenging muscle are complementary, not interchangeable. This is also why walking deserves a separate conversation. Walking is excellent physical activity. It matters for cardiovascular health, mobility, endurance, independence, and much more. But a daily walk and progressive resistance exercise are not identical stimuli for muscle strength. So if you've been saying, "I walk every day, why do my legs still feel weaker?" That question makes sense, and we're going to come back to it. First, let's rebuild the breakfast. After hearing all 5 mistakes, you might be expecting me to give you one perfect breakfast. 2 eggs, exactly this much yogurt, exactly this many grams of something else, at exactly 8:15 in the morning. That's not the point. A better approach is modular. Start with the eggs if you enjoy them. Then ask what the meal is missing. Version 1, the simple breakfast. 2 eggs can be the anchor. Then add another food that contributes protein if your overall diet needs it. That might be plain Greek yogurt, cottage cheese, milk, soy food, beans, or another food that fits the way you eat. Add fruit, vegetables, or a whole grain food based on your appetite and overall diet. Now the eggs aren't being asked to carry the whole breakfast. Version 2, the small appetite breakfast. Some older adults simply don't want a huge meal in the morning. So, eat more food isn't always practical. Instead of creating a giant plate, the goal may be to make the foods you are already comfortable eating work harder nutritionally. 2 eggs plus a smaller serving of another protein-containing food may be more realistic than forcing down a huge breakfast. Version 3, the budget breakfast. You don't need an expensive powder to make this work. Eggs are already one relatively simple option. Depending on your preferences and dietary needs, foods such as milk, beans, lentils, or soy foods can help build protein into other meals later in the day. And that's the larger point. You do not have to solve the entire day before 9 a.m. You simply need to stop assuming that eating one healthy food automatically solves everything after it. And notice what we did here. We never turned eggs into the villain. We never told you to eat 6 of them. And we never invented a magic breakfast. We simply put the eggs back where they belong, as one useful food inside a much bigger muscle preservation strategy. So before your next egg breakfast, remember these 5 mistakes. Number 5, don't mistake 2 eggs for your entire protein strategy. Number 4, don't assume raw means better. Cooking changes digestion, and raw eggs add an unnecessary food safety risk. Number 3, don't treat breakfast timing like a magic muscle window. Current evidence in older adults is far less certain than that. Number 2, don't count eggs while ignoring the rest of the day. And number 1, don't expect food to replace the signal your muscles get from appropriate resistance exercise. If you remember only one sentence, make it this: protein provides the building material. Your muscles still need a reason to stay strong. And that brings us to a question I hear all the time. But I walk every day. Isn't that enough for my legs? Walking is one of the best habits you can maintain as you get older. But walking and resistance exercise don't challenge your muscles in exactly the same way. So if your legs still feel weaker, even though you walk every day, there are a few important reasons why. That's what we're covering next.